Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about Topping E30 II. It's a revision of a very popular budget DAC, but it's not only a cosmetic revision or like some added features, it actually does sound different and improved compared to the original model. In the second part of the video, we'll talk a little bit about matching amplifier, headphone amplifier, L30 II. But we'll start with a DAC because I believe that's what interests the most of you. So E30 II looks exactly the same as the old model. It's the same chassis, same front panel, same back panel. Connections are once again the same, USB, optical, coaxial. You have line output and no headphone output, that's why we have a matching headphone amp. So it is a pure DAC. And it once again uses AK chip, but this time it uses two instead of one. So we have these two DAC chips working together to bring better performance. So I'm going to skip the whole features and what sort of files and frequency sample rates this one supports, because you can just Google E30 II and read that anywhere. So I'm going to focus on how it actually performs. Is it a noticeable improvement over the original one? And I'm going to compare it to several direct competitors. So let's start. Okay, as soon as I connected E30 into my system, I've noticed that it does have a topping lineage. It sounds crisp and really clear, especially in the mid-range and upper frequencies, the way I would expect topping to sound, but it does have weight in the bass line and the overall warmth in the bass and mid-bass that I do not remember original E30 having, or any budget topping for that matter, including D10, the D10S actually was the last one, or the X3 Pro Plus that I reviewed recently. All of these excelled at clarity and detail retrieval for their price, but they were kinda lean sounding. And D30 II is a step away from that character. It does have quite weighty, full, substantial bass line, and I really welcome that. So this time around, if I listen to a very bass-heavy song, and I focus on bass notes specifically, I notice that they're much fuller and much more pleasant, in my opinion, than with the original E30. But also, there is a shift to that warm side. If there is a mistake being made from being dead neutral, this DAC is going to make it towards being slightly fuller and weightier and sacrifice the last bit of speed and nimbleness in the process. But there's no need to worry really, because that's done really well. So even if it is warmer and weightier bass line, it will not overstep its boundaries. It will never sound truly bloated or overblown. It's just a good sounding weighty bass line. And it's handled really well in a way that it doesn't spill to the mid-range. So when I listen to the vocals and basically any instrument, mid-range sounds really crisp and resolving. And edges are definitely very clean and very well etched. That's something that Topping does really, really well. It makes for a really clean and contrasty edges. Everything is outlined and you can just imagine a silhouette of a tone really easily, silhouette of a singer, of an instrument, things like that. But this time around, there is a nice palpable body added to it by the shift in how bass line is presented. And then talking about the highest spectrum, there's a very reasonable amount of extension there, detailing is great, but this is not overly bright sounding DAC. If we talk, for example, about airiness and tracks sounding like they're really lit up with a strong light, this DAC doesn't do that. There's actually sort of like milder, tamer approach to highs than I would expect from a topping at this price level. So to sum it up, it sounds full in the bassline, really crisp with clear edges well outlined in the mid-range, quite decently extended in highs, but not leaning heavily on highs and not being too bright at all. If anything, it might even be just a touch on the darker side when it comes to the highest frequencies. So this makes E30 II a very pleasant and listenable DAC. So I wanted to go ahead and compare it to everything I had at hands. So first of all, of course, the original E30. I do not have that one with me anymore, but I do have some DACs that I used to have when I had E30. So that way I can indirectly compare original E30 with E30 II. And based on that, what I can tell is that E30 II is definitely an upgrade, an improvement in my opinion. It sounds less flat dynamically, but it also sounds less flat spatially because it feels like tones are a little bit more three-dimensional, a little bit more palpable. In terms of just width and depth, I feel that there is not much difference. That's pretty similar. In terms of detail retrieval, original E30 was really good DAC, but this one just adds another dimension when it comes to the body of the tone, to tone timbre and how 3D and palpable everything feels. It's pushing that level up a notch or two compared to original E30, and I do believe that most of you out there would feel like this one is an upgrade if you decided to go from E30 to E30 II. Next, I compared it to SMSL D0100. This is a 250 DAC, and if you think that it outrides betters E30 II, you would be wrong, because it doesn't really. They're quite comparable, with SMSL sounding warmer in the whole frequency spectrum. Mid-range is warmer, highs are warmer. It doesn't outline edges and it doesn't make them as contrasty as E30 II does. But that's more of a preference. I think that some of you would prefer SMSL's softer approach to edges and transients. It's more liquid-like, more musical approach. But some of you would definitely think that E30 II sounds cleaner and crisper, because those outlines of tones are more easily observable. They're just cleaner and more contrasty. And given that I think these two DACs are equally capable, just differently tuned and have different tonalities, I would say that I can easily conclude that I prefer E30 II to the cheaper SMSL SH6 that I for some time had and compared directly to this D0100, and I considered D0100 to be slightly better sounding DAC. And E30 II is matching this one for $100 less, and that makes it a really good value. Finally, I went on and just wanted to compare where are the limits of E30 II, and I compared it to my so far favorite DAC up to like $500 or maybe even a little bit higher, and that's SMSL M500 MKII. And I won't repeat everything about this DAC. I have a full review on it, you can see it, and if you haven't, you should. And this is where E30 II simply cannot compare. In terms of how clean everything sounds, yeah, it can. But M500 MKII sounds just bigger and lusher and slightly more dynamic and fuller in the mid-range. So vocals and instruments sound more present in the room, more palpable and richer, tone timbre is just richer. And also up top, M500 MK2 again feels richer. Like there's a little bit more air and a little bit more texture and tiny things following that main leading tone and that main leading edge that E30 II leaning so heavily on and sounds so clean. But you realize that there's a little bit more to that main clean tone, and M500 MK2 is revealing it and showing it better in a more natural, more lush way. The difference is not huge, which is again a real praise for E30 II at its price point, but yeah, M500 MK2 is better and you can hear that. Now let's dedicate some time to the matching headphone amp L30 II. Once again, it's a really good, clean and crisp sounding amp. It comfortably defeats the original E30 in my opinion. And the same as with E30, I don't have L30 on my hands anymore, the original version. But I did listen the original L30 and compared it directly to a third amp that I still have. It's my reference. And then I compared the new L30 II with this one too. So I remember the difference in performance from the original L30 and this A30 Pro, which is more expensive, and the difference was quite substantial. The original L30 just sounded flatter, less dynamic, less expressive, more gray sounding, thinner sounding, whereas L30 II is much more comparable to A30 Pro. It's almost on the same level, whereas the original L30 wasn't even near that level. So just by having that reference, I can tell you that L30 II is a considerable upgrade, with better dynamics, with beefier bass line, with better control and drive over your headphones. So in my mind, it's a no-brainer basically. But that's not surprising because I think that many affordable head amps that were released in between the original and this one actually sounded better than L30. If you follow this channel, you probably know that already. So let's immediately move to another comparison, an affordable SMSL SH6 that's slightly cheaper than this one, but sounds very full and warm and just lush, and I love that little amp. For its price, its sound quality is really great. And L30 II is $30 more expensive, but it brings the same amount of fullness in the bass and weight and just authority that SH6 has, but with a cleaner and crisper sounding mid-range and highs. If you like that, if you're about clarity, this one is definitely slightly better sounding than SH6. That said, if you maybe have lean or really bright, maybe even screamy headphones, you still might prefer SH6. Then I compared it with more expensive SMSL HO100 and found out that HO100 definitely sounds fuller and warmer in the whole frequency spectrum. And it's the completely same story as if I'm comparing E30 II DAC with D0100 DAC. You can just skip back to that section if you maybe skipped forward to watch only amp part. And everything I said about DACs stands for the amps. SMSL is slightly softer, slightly warmer, lusher sounding, whereas L30 II leans more heavily on edges, on contrasty outlined edges, and sounds super clean, but not as warm and lush as SMSL. Once again, as with the DACs, I consider these two to be roughly on the same level. It's just about your personal preference and matching with your headphones, with their tonality. If you need something to bring clarity, to bring focus on clean edges, on the main leading tones and edges, L32 is your amp. If you want something that will actually sound a little bit softer and with more tone body and with edges that are more blended with that tone body and just everything sounds a little bit fuller and warmer, then SMSL is your friend. My long-term reference, Topping A30 Pro. This is a really good sounding amp, slightly warmer, and you can also notice that here too. Mid-range and highs are going to sound slightly softer and fuller and warmer with A30 Pro, whereas they're going to initially sound cleaner on L32, but also a touch more simplistic. It feels like A30 Pro has slightly richer timbre, tone timbre. Everything else, like dynamics and detail retrieval, feels very comparable actually. But if you listen to a very bass-heavy, bass-demanding song, A30 Pro will show greater control. It will have a firmer grip over bass notes than L32. It just, from time to time, lets the bass line be a little bit fatter and fuller than it ideally probably should. And the A30 Pro doesn't do that. It has a firmer grip on those lowest notes. Other than that, once again, difference is not that big really. And given the price difference, I think that L32 is a really great accomplishment here. So with that, I think it's time to finish this video and conclude that both E30 DAC and L30 amp are actually a mighty good value. They sound really, really good. And I'm especially pleased with this part of the sound that makes everything sound more 3D-like, more palpable in space, more rooted. That's that fullness and authority of the bass line that original E30 and L30 simply didn't have. So both of these have my strong recommendations and they're my new up to $200 references. That would be all for today, guys. See you next time. Bye.